My impressions of episode 1 weren't so kind, and it had some good ideas, but they were completely squandered by two boring leads. Another major complaint I had was the lack of exposition. They just kind of throw Tanya into this thing, and you don't know who she is. They don't even explain the major setup of the show. Now, episode 2 does that. It gives me what I want to know, but turns out what they had to explain really wasn't all that interesting. So the big question is, am I going to continue watching Saga of Tanya the Evil? And the answer is no. Now this episode, it's called Prologue because it gets into how Tanya came to be, how that salaryman aspect I mentioned in my earlier video actually is relevant, because they only briefly kind of allude to it in the first episode. So what we learn is that this salaryman, who I don't believe even has a name as far as we know yet, in the world of Japan, in our world, he was just a higher up at a company and responsible for firing people and was kind of a dick. So one day he fires somebody and this person's clearly distraught by this. So as he gets to the train station after work, and the man who he just fired sneaks up behind him and shoves him in front of a train, killing him. Now this doesn't happen right away. It pauses it. He notices that he freezes in time in midair while this train is slowly approaching, and it just halts and he's just floating there. And all of a sudden people around him are talking, but not in a way you would expect them to. They're actually being controlled by whatever godly figure turns him into Tanya. And the conversation they have is initially interesting, but it gets into this pseudo-intellectual drivel that is just painful to get through. Like, the salaryman says, oh, I don't believe in any god or whatever, so I don't know what... Like, dude, you're talking to a god. There's literally a god who just stopped time while you were about to die, and he's talking to you. He's clearly a higher power. He eventually surmises, oh, you must be the devil, because why would any god let this happen to me? I'm not a bad person. I have things planned. Some idiot pushed me in front of the train. Why would you let that happen? And this conversation kind of just drags on, and it pretends it's a whole lot smarter than it actually is. So this salaryman is eventually reborn into Tanya in the world that we saw in the first episode. Tanya is really gifted in magic, and it's determined at a young age by the military that she's quite skilled at the age of 9, which is pretty much unheard of as far as the show lets on. So she gets this master plan to ride the fast track to Promotionville thanks to her new powers. She believes that, alright, well, I'm so clearly skilled that I'll be able to do what I please, and I'll get promoted quickly, and then I can sit in the back and not really have to worry about fighting on the front lines. But I don't get why she believes this. It's clearly a fascist country that has no qualms with throwing a child into a war, so why would they toss up this opportunity to have somebody so clearly powerful in magic not to be on the front lines fighting the enemy? And this is the show's big issue, because there's so many contradictions. She's supposed to be the smart one of this show, but she makes the dumbest mistakes like this. Like, obviously they're not gonna just let you sit in the back and do nothing. You're strong. They want to win the war. One major contradiction that really bothers me, though, is there's an internal monologue with Tanya where she explains why she doesn't like war, why she doesn't like killing, because she feels it's wasteful. And it's an interesting perspective, given that this salaryman initially was so cold and is okay with firing people, and when they tell their sob stories, he's just like, get the fuck out of here, I don't give a shit. I'm just here to fire you. Fuck off, asshole. You're terrible for this company. Get lost. I appreciate that there's more depth to this character than what you may have initially thought. But the problem comes along in the training where she's giving her subordinates the drill sergeant sort of attitude, and two of the members in the back of the group were kind of like, why is this 9-year-old in charge of us? So in the next scene, there's an explosion from a side of the building, and these two soldiers go flying 3 stories down, landing on the ground after being blasted by what we saw in the first episode, those magic rifles that tear people's arms off through this show and kill them pretty effectively. But she shoots these two people that were just kind of being slightly dickish. So she's not for killing. She thinks war's wasteful, but right out of the gate, like right away, just nearly kills two people for merely talking crap on her. Now, in the first episode, at the end, she's very much responsible for two people's deaths, two insubordinate troops again. But you can kind of like at least write off this contradiction a little bit because it's down the line. This is maybe she's changed her perspective at that point. But this part of her training, this prologue episode, it's like 1 second she's stating, I don't like killing. Next second, she's practically killing people. In fact, it's a little weird that these two soldiers don't die. They're in an enclosed area. They get blasted by a rifle that shoots magic and explodes them through a brick wall out the side, falling 3 stories down, and they're alive somehow. They don't even look damaged, really. They look like they just kind of like were pushed to the ground by some bully. Like, it makes no fucking sense. It didn't feel like that it was just Tanya making a statement about herself when she said, I don't like killing, because the show kind of shows her being very forthright through both episodes up to this point, but then just straight up contradicts this idea. This episode isn't all bad. It does still have the spectacle of the fights. They're dog fights essentially in the sky, just not between planes and rather groups of people that are flying about, and it's kind of interesting. They don't have the same sort of detail of the actual combat as much because this is more of a prologue, but you can still tell that setup of a cruel world that is fitting of World War One. It's here. But now that Tanya has been fleshed out, it's clear this show isn't writing her competently. It isn't writing much of anything competently. And despite the few things that I like from the first episode and the few things I like from this episode, like I enjoyed the way that the salaryman's life is turned on its head. Literally, because he's pushed head over heels into a train. I like how that it's turned on its head, and it's because of his callous nature. It's a direct result of him being so overly confident and thinking, well, nothing this silly would ever happen to me, and then something that silly happens to him. That's not enough to keep me watching, though. I can't stand when a show has a protagonist that is not a good character. This is the focal point of your entire show, and you just bungle it. You fuck it up. I'm a firm believer in not forcing myself to consume anything that's barely scraping the lowly heights of mediocrity. That's what this show is. That's what Saga of Tanya the Evil. Again, fuck that name. I hate that. If I was working on this show, I'd say fuck that name. We're not going with that name. We're changing this shit. Make it less fucking wordy. But then again, the script of this entire show is wordy. It's so bloated. I guess maybe it makes sense in a stupid sort of way. But I'm not bothering with this anymore. I just don't want to force myself to watch this stuff. I have more interesting things to watch. There's so much out there. Why would I bother continue watching this? Why would I need to see another episode to know that I don't really enjoy this show? It's maybe a 4 or a 5. Like, that's at best what it's going to be for me. And I could be watching a 9 or a 10 or a 7 even. And there's so many of those out there. Why waste time on this? It's dropped completely. Done. See ya. Never watching it again.
As always, like, subscribe, all that nonsense. It is much appreciated, and you can follow me on Twitter at wordsmaybe, same thing as my YouTube title.
This is being recorded after the fact because this video has to hit the 10-minute mark for the sake of YouTube's algorithms. So, I'm going to sit here for a second or two. More like 30-ish. Just to remind you, Tanya of Evil, that show. Or Saga of Tanya the Evil, sorry. That show's bad. Don't watch it. Watch something else. Little Witch Academia is pretty good.
Watch that.